I don't necessarily think that people should have to have a life goal or a life mission or do some project they don't want to do, but I do think more people should have the opportunity.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Big Thoughts, Little Talks. In this episode, I talk with Mek, a computer scientist who currently works at the Internet Archive, where he directs OpenLibrary.org, an online library and catalog attempting to build a webpage for every book ever published. We talk about how OpenLibrary works, how Mek became passionate about digital rights and open access to information, and other projects and thoughts that have been on his mind. Mek also flips the script on me, and I talk a bit more about my own motivation for starting this podcast. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Mek. I don't know if you actually remember, but I think we've met a couple times in person in the darkness of the Mission Cliff sauna.
Yep.
So this is our first official maybe meeting in the daylight.
That's right. I guess for those who don't know me, I think oftentimes the way that I'm described by my friends, which is not how I would describe myself, is as a very avid rock climber. And when I'm not rock climbing, I spend time in the sauna philosophizing. And so there's always some awkward out of place question that I'll ask to everyone. And it's usually, see, the thing about it is it's usually something that I don't have a good answer to. I'm trying to source feedback from other people who are smarter. So um, it's always fun to get to talk with people like you and just hear about what you're thinking about without all the pressure of life.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think the question that you brought up um, during that sauna session was about if you had 1 year to invest to work on something,
Yeah.
make the greatest impact on humankind, what would it be? So, just your casual, light conversation. But I
There
remember,
were some great answers.
yeah,
Some of the answers were, I think I mentioned something about libraries, but there were a lot of philanthropic answers that were given. A few people in the sauna were from nonprofits talking about the last mile problem.
mhm. Yeah, which actually was the first time I heard about OpenLibrary, because I think that was related to your answer. So I guess for the listeners out there who aren't aware, could you give a brief description of what OpenLibrary is and how you've been involved?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I also do at some point want to turn the tables, and I'm romantic with this idea that when people are trying to accomplish something, that it's better to be on their team. And I just love the idea of being on your team and figuring out more about what is really the end goal of Big Thoughts and Little Talks and how I can help you get there. Because I love talking about OpenLibrary, but I bet there's a lot of other sauna philosophy overlapping questions that we could talk about that will help further some of your goals. I will be selfish and talk about OpenLibrary for just a second, because I do think it's somewhat related to the whole shelter in place COVID situation that we're finding ourselves in right now, which is Open Library, or openlibrary.org is a catalog which aspires to be a web page for every book in the world ever published. And it was originally started by a young man named Aaron Swartz, who was one of my personal role models, and kind of a really big champion of my values. Um, I could talk a lot about Aaron in terms of he was a huge proponent for enabling Americans to access their own case law for free. I think that's something everyone should have. It's hard to be told to follow the laws when someone who doesn't have money isn't empowered with the ability to access them.
Hmm.
He also stood up for net neutrality. There were so many things that Aaron did to further the world, and one of his projects was the Open Library. And it started off as a catalog of book metadata. It's not too different from something like Goodreads, maybe. That's probably what people are most comfortable with. You see a book record, you mark it as want to read, or you track your progress, and then maybe you buy it on Amazon.
Hmm.
Well, Open Library has, since 2006 or 2007, when the project was started, it's kind of merged into the mainstream of the Internet Archive, which is a nonprofit here in usually sunny San Francisco, in the inner Richmond. And by the way, yeah, go ahead.
So that there's actually a physical location for the Internet Archive in San Francisco, right?
It's a wild and kooky, huge Christian Science church that was founded in 1923. And the reason I can remember that year is this was the big date when the grand reopening of the public domain occurred. So just recently, I think 2 years ago,
Mm.
finally, after all this hullabaloo, books that were published in the year 1923 and a lot of other material entered the public domain. And so we had a huge celebration in our enormous, white, pristine temple of knowledge where we had hundreds and hundreds of people and showed off our work, such as OpenLibrary, which is an online website where you can essentially read or borrow millions of books. I think the number is currently close to 3.5 million books that you can read or borrow for free from your browser. And the reason this has become especially important right now is that libraries all across the country have been closing because of COVID-19. Um, that's definitely not something we're happy about. Uh, we love libraries and the services they provide. And by the way, libraries do so much more than just lend out books. That's really, in my mind, the tip of the iceberg. They enable people to learn how to pay taxes. They offer computers. They offer assistance. There are reference rooms. There's usually after school programs, so many different things. So Open Library does a fraction of that, and we've been trying to step up and make sure that classrooms, teachers, parents, and students have access to the educational fundamental materials that they need during this time when across the country and even across the world, so many libraries uh, are at least closed in their physical locations, and there's so many wait lists as a result for their digital collections that we can only do so much. But that's where we currently
Right.
are.
So yeah, that's actually I want to dig a little bit more into how the open library and just e-lending in general works. I admit I didn't actually know much about it until I did some research yesterday, and it seems like there's a quite a lot you can get into that. But um, so it seems like there are with traditional libraries, and this is based on my a few minutes of research. So correct me if I'm wrong on anything. So
Sure.
traditional libraries use work with publishers directly to obtain a license for one book at a time. Um, and so that the libraries can sort of simulate like we agree to only check out one of copy of this ebook at a time so that it still maintains this sort of one book checked in, one book checked out. um, am I sort of getting that right, and how does open library handle these checkouts?
So not exactly. The first thing I should say, the only right answer is I'm not a lawyer. I certainly can't provide any listeners on your podcast legal advice about library statutes. I can open by saying that for the last 10 years or so, the Internet Archive has been recognized as an official accredited California state special library. And so you are right from the perspective of we operate just like any other library does
Mhm.
across the country. Now, the reason this question gets so complicated is uh, libraries work drastically different in India and in China and in the United States. The United States has really special rules around uh, like the for sale doctrine, for instance. From my understanding, a library doesn't need a license to buy a book and lend it out. In fact, a library doesn't even need to buy the book. If you go to your library and you donate a book, that book has changed possession to your hands, and then you can lend out that copy of a book. And in fact, there isn't really even this magical accreditation for being a library. I mean, there are so many things that go into being a library and serving print disabled patrons, for instance. There are nonprofits whose missions specifically um, revolve around this idea of serving underserved communities or people with dyslexia or blindness. And there are certain clauses within copyright policy that enable these organizations as nonprofits to do their job. Some of them are under fair use.
Okay.
I wouldn't be comfortable claiming I'm a lawyer, but one of the interesting details is that For within the ebook landscape, it's just a tiny bit different because the way that the Internet Archive works is they purchase a physical copy of a book, or someone donates the book to them. It goes into one of our physical archives, like safely in a box. Before that, we digitize every page. We have trained professionals, these imaging operators, who are taking these high fidelity um, snapshots of each page, and that's getting
Mhm.
OCR'd. And we create these digital artifacts, which using DRM, either in the browser or on offline devices,
And what is
um,
DRM exactly?
so digital rights management, or DRM, are just a set of precautions or techniques to ensure that, for instance, only a single copy of a piece of content can be accessed at a time or for a certain period of time. It's one of the reasons
Okay.
it's really hard to just like put something on your Kindle or take it off, or if you've gotten a DVD and you try to extract the files, you'll notice that there's something protecting it. So DRM are just protections.
Okay.
But really, the takeaway is the Internet Archive follows this model called controlled digital lending. You can actually go to controlleddigitallending.org and you can read about the position papers, the position statement. But the Internet Archive isn't trying to do anything revolutionary from a library model. Like, libraries are so wonderful. The problem with libraries is there hasn't really been a model that has let libraries enter the digital age. They're basically being kept in the physical landscape to die when really libraries' missions are to promote literacy, to promote an educated society where we can help each other and do great things. And so the small, if we can call it an innovation, because we're working with a lot of other library partners in this space, the small innovation is finding a way with the same protections that libraries are using. How can we lend out a single copy at a time of our physical books in a digital format, which is accessible to people with print disabilities, which is accessible to educators, to teachers, to students. It lets you do things like search inside. It lets you do things like read aloud. There's so many benefits to being able to operate in the information age and not being stuck, trapped in the paper pages of a single book.
Yeah. Yeah. I signed up for my account yesterday night and
Oh
checked
yeah,
out my first book, and I was yeah, it was actually like a joyfully simple experience. Like there was
wow.
a book that I've been looking for, Poor Charlie's Almanac. Heard a lot of good things about it, but for some reason that book is just so hard to find, like on Amazon and in libraries. And I was just like, I was amazed. I was like, oh wow, it was so easy and so accessible. Um, so I'm curious. Actually, when I was reading up on Open Library, I read that thing about where you actually have to purchase a physical copy of each book, and then you keep that book. Like that book can't actually like be distributed anywhere. So you just keep these books somewhere safe. Um,
Somewhere out there, there is a physical archive with well over 1 million books that are being preserved in uh, in boxes and pallets and carefully wrapped. And you're exactly right. So when we say we lend out a book, there's very special accounting that's being done, and we make sure that if Peter has a copy of a book, then unless we have either multiple editions, so you could have like the first edition of a book or the second
mhm.
edition, and that's one way to get people access to the resources they need. Or if we have multiple copies, and in terms of copies, one of the special programs that the Internet Archive is running now, um, our director Chris Freeland could probably speak to it a bit. It's called the Open Libraries Online Initiative, and Open Libraries is a partnership program of trying to find out how many libraries there are, for instance, across the country that can't keep all of their books on their physical space, right? So if you go to a
Mhm.
library, it only has enough shelf space for a certain number of books, but most libraries, academic libraries especially, have these huge archives where, as patrons request newer books or different books, the books that are not used as much end up out of circulation. They get removed from the library and put in warehouses. And so one thing that we've been wondering is there a way we can follow the same exact model as we've been doing for the Internet Archive and with Open Library, and provide an opportunity to libraries to lend out copies the digital copies that we have against the materials that they, as accredited libraries, can vouch for. Um,
Oh,
and
cool.
and so far we're in early stages, but that's been making all of the difference right now as libraries are closed to the public. And so finding creative ways to make sure that patrons can still be served fundamental resources is a big change that has occurred over the past few months in response to this pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I'm sure so many industries have been impacted by this pandemic, but I'm sure the Open Library project has certainly been uniquely impacted in that the moving from like actually being able to check out physical books, that's almost not an option in a lot of places anymore. So I think that what you're doing is yeah, the whole project of in the spirit of open access is something I'm really fond of. How would you respond to some of the criticism that Open Library has received
I was
around,
just going to mention that
yeah, around
not
copyright?
everyone is ecstatic about what the Internet Archive is doing. And I think at some fundamental level, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. Um, but there are a lot of people who aren't used to online libraries and what they mean. And especially when you have authors are a good example. There's also illustrators, indie bookstores. Um, Bookstores are a really sad one. I'll talk about that a little bit, because bookstores provide so many services to local communities like libraries do. They have shows, they have readings. Indie bookstores are just such magical places. I'm so lucky to live on 24th Street here in the Mission in San Francisco, and we have um, at least two different indie bookstores on the street, which I recommend you visit after the shelter in place is over. Support your local bookstores, but it's really hard when uh, people online, they see what the Internet Archive is doing, and they say this is so nice that you're helping educators, and it's so nice that you're helping students and parents, but what about us? Like, it's kind of a good analogy, Peter. One of the analogies that I like is like the renter paradox right now, where you have
Mhm.
people struggling to pay rent across the city because many people are out of work, and then you have renters who, they make money by renting out their places, and it's like, well, do we cancel rent? Do we delay rent? Like, why should tenants win over landlords? And I think it's a touchy thing. um, but at the end of the day, I think the best that we can do is try to make sure that we are supporting everyone, and specifically with bookstores. I have a friend, Eddie Nix, who, and I'll have to drop you the link, who's running this enormous um, indie bookstore live music concert this whole weekend. It's called Bookstock. You can find it on Facebook. There's hundreds of people going. We've helped. It's mostly, I mean, Eddie's done all the work. The Internet Archive is just trying to provide as much digital online storage space for all of the videos and trying to get the word out. Um, but that is going to be an amazing effort, an amazing concert. I hope people hear about it and do join.
Cool. Yeah,
And
I'll drop that link in the show notes. When is that happening?
I can get you the specifics in a minute. It's happening on the 15th, so that's tomorrow, and I think the 16th and 17th, so it's all weekend. It starts, I think, 8 a.m. Pacific time because he's in the Midwest.
All right,
Um,
I'll try to make sure the I'll get a this episode out and published before at least the last one of those. Then.
Sure. So I think the big thing is just not trying to leave people behind. There are bookstores that are worrying about their books being sold, and they're saying if there are libraries that are distributing things online, then what about us? Authors feel very similarly. I know that there are a few guilds or unions that represent authors that would much rather a situation where people do, as I think you said, like licensing books, and then like there are a lot of models that could exist um, around accessing books that are mostly an artifact of the reality that most library. When's the last time you went to a library that had a full-time software engineer?
Yeah, it's probably the software engineer is probably
It's not most
not sitting at the
libraries.
desk in front when you're greeted. Yeah, I don't think I've been to one.
So how are they supposed to do digital lending?
I I'm not sure.
I think libraries face this problem a lot too, and their
Yeah,
answer is that they partner with intermediaries. One of the famous ones is Overdrive. Overdrive is a for profit run by a Japanese conglomerate called Rakuten. They do a bunch of stuff. They have like the Viki Asian dramas. That's one of them. I only know that because I'm trying to learn Chinese, and so I've been watching some Taiwanese dramas, which has been a fun
nice.
exercise.
Great way to
But
learn.
yeah, it's hard. Um, but Overdrive also has an app called Libby. I feel like that's the one that a lot of folks are familiar with. And the way that it works is almost specifically because libraries don't have their own lending systems, they purchase a 1 year lease, oftentimes. It's not the only option, right? People can still buy books and lend them. But
Sure.
because a lot of these libraries, these nonprofit libraries, don't have engineers and they don't have a budget to really build out an engineering team. They're trying to make books available. They pay up to 10x the price that we would pay on Amazon for a 1 year lease. So they're buying it over and over again, which also is really hard. Um, and the end result is that the libraries will be able to get those books on Libby or other platforms. And it just so happens that the Internet Archive and a lot of our partners do have engineering resources. And way back since like 2010, I think we've been running our own digital library, again rightfully against the copies of books that we've acquired using controlled digital lending. And I think the big thing is for libraries, we wear our mission on our sleeves, right? Our mission is to try to provide uh, access to patrons across the country who are tax paying dollars. The money is coming from them. We're trying to provide them back with democratic access to materials for self empowerment. And Overdrive and Rakuten is a for-profit corporation, printing $100 million in revenue a year, and
Wow.
live and authors. Here's the thing: my heart goes out to authors. I have an author in the family. I wish we had better models to support authors because publishers make a lot of money. Amazon makes a lot of money. There are a lot of authors and indie bookstores that are struggling, and and authors are just wondering like, what can we do? Um, and they can't really go up against Amazon. That's like if Amazon cuts
Right.
you off as an author, you're done, right? And libraries already buy authors' books. They pay a ton of money to purchase copies of authors' books, and I think authors have just gotten used to this idea that a model exists with this like the Overdrive digital lending, and maybe they wish that was the only model accessible. But man, if it were, that would be so bad even for authors because imagine this. This is where the rubber hits the road here. um, if you go to a library today, you can find a book from the early 1900s, right?
Mhm.
But if you are a library and you only have so much budget and you want to buy digital goods or you want to lease digital goods, like a book, right, a digital book, then and you buy that book over and over again. If there's a book that only like 5 or 6 people want and it's going to cost you, $50 to get it, are you going to do it? Probably not. And so you're going to have a catalog as a digital library of everything published in like maybe 2000 to 2020. But
Mhm.
what about the things in the 1900s? Like, I think that to really answer your question about critics, I think the thing to keep in mind is even a digital library of our size, even with all the things that we're doing today, what I heard is that we're lending out about as much as like a small town library, right? So
Wow.
I mean, putting that in perspective, and the majority of things that are being borrowed are on the older side. Like really, our mission is augmenting people's libraries because there's so much reference and resource material that isn't even available in paper form anymore.
Right.
If you look on Amazon and try to buy something in the 1900s, good luck.
Yeah, and I guess that was sort of my experience with the Port Charlie's Almanac. But I'm curious actually. So this kind of ties into my question of like, what do you actually see as the vision for Open Library? Like, at what point, um, like, what is the sort of end goal you're working towards? Does it involve sort of integrating with the public library system in some way so that there's sort of a nice, like, back and forth symbiosis
Yeah.
there, or what are your thoughts on that?
So I guess I can only speak personally here rather than, all of this are these are kind of my thoughts rather than I'm not a lawyer. I'm not speaking for the Internet Archive right now. Um, I'm really inspired by the precedent that Aaron Swartz set of just being a champion for people's digital and civil rights. I see the open library as an opportunity to give back some of the leverage to the people and the citizens so that they can use their own funds to make sure that there exists at least one library that represents their demographic, that speaks to them. Um, there's a young woman named Marley Diaz who, when she was 12 or 13, founded this thing called the 1000 Black Girls Books Library. Um, she noticed that at her personal school library, like an embarrassing number of books actually focused on strong black protagonist characters. And then if you facet further and say, what about young girls? It becomes almost non-existent. And so she started this whole campaign to identify around 1,000 books that had empowering content that she could see herself in. And since then, the Internet Archive has worked with partners. We've acquired around 300 of those, and we've built a collection specifically for Marley's library. And tons of the books have been on wait lists since day one because it's just filling a need that people have. There's a great statistic that in the New York library system, something like 85% of the books were written by white men, and like there definitely aren't 85% of the community white men reading them, and
Yeah,
it just goes
that's
to
not too surprising.
show. Yeah. So I mean, it's one of the ways that I would love to see that vision implemented is something that we implemented recently called the book sponsorship program. So if you go to openlibrary.org/sponsorship, um, we provide detailed instructions on how you, Peter, or anyone in the audience can take a book that was really special to them, or that they just feel needs to be represented in the library, and they can sponsor the cost of the book and digitization. And then within 1 month, we'll digitize it, and if it's eligible, we'll add it to our lending program so that it can be borrowed one book at a time. Uh, and that's one of the bets that we're making. In general, I would just like to see Open Library be not something that does something revolutionary or differently. Just what would a library look like if we did have engineering resources? We could do a good job of taking our existing working library system and just allowing it to exist in the future, not shaking things up, just literally providing a path forward so that all the libraries out there can do the best job possible helping their patrons. That's what this is all about. When Open Library started, it was just a catalog of books. Now we have 3.5 million books that you can read and borrow, and now people all around the world are helping sponsor the books that are valuable and meaningful to them. And so I think that's the path I would like to see continued into the future.
Yeah, yeah, that's really inspiring, and yeah, it's very clear. I'd really admire uh, your drive and intentionality, and the way that you clearly have a strong passion for this. I'm curious, where what do you think would be like the outside of Open Library, taking a step back, like what do you think is sort of the thread that you or I guess sort of the theme of your career and your life that sort of ties all this together, and what you like when you wake up in the morning, what is the thing that gets you going?
The ikigai. What is when you wake up in the morning?
Yeah,
What is
exactly.
your equal? So before I move to that, this is like a perfect segue to kind of spiral out. I
Sure.
do want to say that I am passionate about access to information, about books. Um, I've lost a few friends of mine and either mentors or people who I cared about who um, uh, who maybe had ideas that were before their time, or who were too passionate about the cause. And the political landscape that we live in just sometimes is unkind to people who have really good intentions. And so I am sensitive to that. And I want to say that a part of my passion does come from the excellent work of Aaron Swartz. It also comes from working with a lot of amazing people. Um, the Open Library has something like 100 plus contributors from across the globe, and on any given week, this looks more like 5 to 10. But we have a community call every Tuesday, and you get to see the faces of people from Amsterdam, people in India, people in New Zealand, in Toronto. My teammates Charles and Drini, and also Brenton, have been the lifeblood of this project. And a lot of the passion comes from working with people like that. In terms of other projects that really get me excited, there's a story behind it because when I was in third grade, I used to love AOL Instant Messenger. That was my thing. The magical thing about AOL Instant Messenger is it's kind of like a command line. It's weird to put it that way, but or think of a Google search. You have a text area, you type something in, you press enter, you get instant results, and it brings you back to a command line, right? You're kind of operating at the speed of thought. And the thing about instant messenger, which is even more magical than Google to me, is that there are people at the end of the line. You're having an active conversation, people are contributing. Um, you're able to collaborate in a way that prior to AOL Instant Messenger, there were very few things. I mean, eventually we get into IRC and other systems, which I would learn about, which were magical into their own respects and have their own following. And now we have Slack today. It just
Mm-hmm.
goes to show how powerful it is. But I was very surprised that how much siloing there was on a computer. Like you have Microsoft Word, right, or OpenLibrary or OpenOffice or whatever your document viewer of choices, your text editor, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have your web browser, and you have your instant messenger, and you have your media player, and you have to click out of every single program and interact with each and be limited to each program um, individually, right? So it's very hard to interact with like search and a messenger. And now we're seeing entire industries being built around this. We see chatbots where you type something and it will do work for you, or it'll schedule your emails, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
magical, but there's no reason we couldn't have done this back in 1996 or 1993. And one of the first things that I did was discovered when you click the chat button to enter a chat with friends, it gives you a whole string of numbers. You can just clobber this. You can delete it and put in an easier name. I liked friends or hello as a fun name. The thing is, if you chose a chat name that someone else had taken, you would have a collision and you would just end up in their chat. And back in 1996, people were
Wow.
not really comfortable with like random. That was like stranger danger, right? That's when the word IRL meant something. Now, like IRL doesn't really mean anything, right? We all just are firstborn citizens of the internet. But back then, you would have your mother say like, "Don't talk to strangers," yada yada yada. So it was the wild wild west, and I think I loved that. And so I would just enter all of these chats and meet people. And honestly, I didn't have any mentors that were computer scientists back in the day when I was in third grade, fourth grade. And I stumbled into people who were programming bots for the instant messenger. And so the talk to Oscar protocol, there was talk and talk to, you could actually write bots that would control the chat rooms, that would listen to input from other people, and you could write these little programs. And so I remember using Java. I wrote a bot that would integrate Google search. So you could say, like, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? And it would answer, and people's minds would be blown. You could create games, etc. And so the idea of connecting information and allowing people to operate at the speed of thought, like where we want to get to is telepathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we use our meat fingers, we use our hands, and we type on a keyboard, and like that is the limiting factor. Or we're like touching a screen. And I'm not going to be one of those overambitious people who says like, yes, the future is telepathy. In a few years, we're going to be able to speak each other through our minds. But I would be brave enough to say it seems obvious that's the direction we're heading. That the only things constant are if bandwidth is a thing that has to improve for us to communicate faster, then we're going to explore new mechanisms. It might not be telepathy, but it'll model that type of idea. And so this is a long way of saying from a very young age, I saw the potential of dissolving the boundaries, whether it's between books or whether it's between chat programs or any program. How can we just help people reach their full potentials? It's not what a company wants. I don't care that a company wants everyone in a walled garden having their own sign in, only accessing the data from that one program. What I would love to see is a rich landscape of programs that can interoperate with each other. And the way that you win is providing the best experience. It's not locking up data and holding people hostage. And so this took me all the way from third grade. I was pretty sure in third grade I would go for a PhD in computer science or computational linguistics, and that's what I started. I had terrible insomnia from a really young age. And so I felt, and I wasn't very popular. And so I feel like I spent a lot of time just reading and thinking. And I spent a lot of time on AOL Instant Messenger. That was really formative for me because I met hundreds of people, many who I went on to meet in person and work on projects with. And I received a very special type of education from the cloud. Prior to MOOCs, these were my mentors, my peers, my tutors. So I don't know that this really bled into school because I don't know that school did a very good job of incorporating a lot of these threads into the curriculum. And I think I, like many people, just became disinterested. Um, I did okay in school. I wasn't the world's smartest student, but it was really outside of the classroom that I do feel like I did a lot of project based learning.
Yeah, yeah. I think safe to say that you had a very non-traditional, I guess, third grade experience. But
I had a privileged experience. I think that this was also a problem. Um, I had a very loving family. I have a very loving family, a brother and sister who I care about a lot. My parents were always encouraging. My mother maybe was even the type of person who would say, like, "Don't work so hard. Like you're killing yourself here." Maybe my father had a different opinion, um, but I, I I can't discount the fact that I lived in like a well off area in Cheshire, Connecticut. I had all the support that I needed. Like my parents helped pay for college. It is so hard to even keep up, and it's easy for this is what gets me frustrated and animated. It's easy for someone who comes from a family of hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars to say, like, look, I made it myself. I started from no money. You didn't start from negative money. And I think that's a big thing. Negative money means someone looks at you and they draw a conclusion about you and your value. Negative money means you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay for dinner. And if you're like a Lyft driver and an Uber driver and you have no upward mobility and you're driving people around, 12 hours a day, like that's negative money. And it's not because of their ability. These people, under different circumstances with different training, would probably add more value to the world than I do. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of changed my mind and no longer felt like mapping the world's knowledge and creating tools for thought were the best use of my time because like I hate to say it but like there's some huge demographic of like older white men in Silicon Valley that are being helped by that mission. And I think that it's really hard solving the last mile problem in nonprofits where you're like trying to ship water to areas without clean water. It's really hard and it's hard to scale. And so I've found this middle ground, kind of the intersection between technology and empowering tools for thought. And I think OpenLibrary kind of fits into that. But outside of OpenLibrary, there are other projects that I feel like I'm pretty passionate about that solve similar things. And you asked what would be the next step for OpenLibrary. Um, I really like Pandora as a model. Do you remember the Music Genome project? Do you
yeah, I
remember
do.
reading any news articles?
Yeah, I think that especially early in the early Pandora days, that was a big thing about trying to create the sort of genome and library for music. I think
Yeah.
more recently it's become just like a radio a station. I don't know if they're doing much more on the music genome front, but yeah, how has that sort of inspired your view on books?
Well, AI is so good nowadays with your convolutional neural networks and ability to, just process billions or millions of songs and classify them. That, yeah, I can appreciate some of the music genome aspect has been phased out. I mean, really, the value in a genome project is being able to show to patrons, to listeners, to readers, a breakdown of what they're reading. Give them as much information and empowerment as you can to help guide their decisions. It's not as necessary for a recommendation system if you have AI, but it's a useful tool in understanding why is the black box operating the way it is. Well, I was asking myself, why isn't there a book genome project? And there was. Back in like 2011, 12, 13, there's this thing called the Book Genome Project by this guy, Aaron Stanton, who I chatted with. He's amazing. And they got it. You can use the Wayback Machine. This is another link I'll give you. You can use the Wayback Machine to see what the book genome, they called it Book Lamp, which used the book genome. Uh, Book Lamp, they had it down, and it was a wonderful service that said it showed you a plot, and it said these are the exact areas in the book where there's like a romantic scene. Is crazy. So you could use that to help determine if a book is good for their children, maybe. Have you ever seen those GitHub plots? It's like a calendar view. It looks like a matrix. Some people might not have video here, so I'll describe
Yeah,
it. It
yeah.
looks
I
like a
think it's
matrix for
talking about the
all
like
the days that you
contribution graph.
contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Book Genome Project did something like that, but for like these are the pages in a book that are about dragons, or this is the section where it's really exciting. And you can see how many sections are exciting. Where like these are the books about chemistry, and you could see a breakdown, a bar plot of like this book is 98% mystery and 20% horror and 10% fantasy. And it's just a magical lens that we no longer have. And so I don't know if they were a nonprofit. I know they were a .org, but they
Do,
got
do you know?
acquired by.
Do you know what their original intention was for? Was it more for like education or, um, yeah, like what were the primary applications they're selling?
I mean, it was prior to Goodreads, and so I think the real goal was just to build a community for book lovers that really focused on like the narrative text analysis aspects. Using science to liberate as much of a book as possible was kind of their tagline, paraphrased. But they got acquired by Apple. Uh, I can't speak about the reasons why, but there was some of the technology that didn't even really deal with the main element of books. It's now used for other things. But anyway, that was really disappointing. And so I see there as an opportunity. The Internet Archive has something like 3.5 million books. So why don't we develop a community book genome project where every month or every quarter we'll run the code that the community wants against all the full text for our books, and we'll be able to get the n-grams out. We'll be able to identify like summaries, topics, all that sorts of stuff. And so we actually have a project for that on GitHub. It's the Open Book Genome Project. I'll provide a link there. But if you're an open source software engineer and want to work on a nonprofit effort, that's kind of the future of OpenLibrary, and also connects the dots of how do we just make everything as useful as possible. There are 30,000 books on Amazon about calculus. None of us have even a fraction of enough time in our lives to identify the good ones if we don't work together. And that's what Wikipedia is about. That's the type of thing that I hope the Book Genome Project and OpenLibrary become, just a community effort to not only build the library together to identify the right books, but let's build tools together to really surface the value in every book and make that available to everyone. It shouldn't just be the people who can afford it.
Yeah, that's actually really fascinating. It's something that I've been thinking about, maybe less in the context of books, but in the terms of just like online content and news sources. And um, I just find this trend of there's so much content out there on the internet now, like Facebook and short form and like longer form content even. And it's really hard to find high quality content, like to go to one place and find really high quality content. And I think there's some defaults people have, and like the New York Times for journalism. There's some newsletters people subscribe to, but um, yeah, it seems
And
like
that's kind of
having
the problem. The,
yeah
the problem is that everyone is reading the same books and the same wrong. I don't think that there's such a thing as reading a wrong book. You get informed by it. But I think retroactively, some people say, like, I wish I hadn't read that book, or like, I wish I had known this other book existed. And I think kind of one of the big problems of our culture is we do things so siloed and independently that we're all reading research papers independently, we're reading books independently, and sometimes we give reviews, but there isn't any holistic experience to try to make sense of all of the information that's out there and give people a path through it. And I think this is really where my life mission, my ikigai, came from, of building a map of the world's knowledge. Why don't we have a Google Maps for getting from A to Z in from here to Alaska, maybe. But we don't have, not only do we not have a Google Books for knowledge, we can't just go from here's my third grade class with Miss Taylor learning cursive. How do I get from there to being a computational linguist, right? There's there's no map there that shows me the shortest path. And
Hmm.
there's nothing like Wikipedia that has enabled the world to work together on creating it. And
Yeah.
that just seems like a huge missed opportunity. And what graphs do exist are kind of locked in these walled gardens. Like think of the
Yeah.
Facebook knowledge graph or the Google knowledge graph. Wouldn't you like to be able to query that? But
Yeah, I think the struggle, or it seems like the difficulty with that is the curation aspect, and especially like when you're mentioning there are 30,000 books about calculus. It's like if someone wanted to learn how to do calculus, there's someone who has to, perhaps with a group or arbitrarily by themselves, like go through and determine what is the best source of calculus, or what is the best book on calculus out there right now. Um, do you have an idea
as
of
we
how to
enter a
tackle that?
world, as we enter a world where we have self-driving cars, um, and I'm not saying that as just like a blanket statement. I just mean like driving cars is a difficult task. Uh, it's something that a lot of the companies are getting wrong in specific cases. Like people have died from self-driving cars. People have died from human vehicles. But the question is, the more and more that we see studies of artificial intelligence doing transcription better than humans can, or voice recognition better than humans can, or face detection better than humans can, and in some ways, in some circumstances, driving cars better than humans can, with what hubris do we believe we are better curators than, um, or by ourselves than humans that have technology at our disposal to help make those judgments? I don't think we should live in a techno dystopian world where everything is done in a black box and we don't listen to all the voices that matter. I think we need the voices that matter, but I don't think it's either or. I think that we're going to see. I live with a housemate named Bobby, and she works on ethical research in AI, and it's lovely to have conversations with Bobby because she'll bring up all of these cases where the circumstances of how AI gets built are completely broken. Of like the quintessential example of like face detection not working on black people or people of color. It's like that's mind blowing, right? And oftentimes you'll look on the steering committees of these projects and you say, well, that's no wonder. Like it's a bunch of white men that are driving the steering committee, and they don't have diverse opinions. And this goes even a step further backward to the fact that even myself, I'm guilty of when I was in college. I felt almost resentful of having to take some humanities courses. I don't know if you had a similar experience. Where you're like, oh, I have to take an English or language arts class, or I have to take a foreign language. Was
Yeah,
that your opinion at all?
I think well, I guess maybe I have a unique experience of mostly taking hard science classes, and so I sort of appreciated some most of the humanity classes. There were certainly some that felt like fluff. So I know your sentiment.
Yeah, but it feels like a lot of technologists who have great intentions and I have to say really good values coming from their communities and their parents. It's not like someone who doesn't take a class doesn't know anything about ethics. But I think Richard Feynman said it really well in his paper on cargo cult science that like to truly be a wonderful scientist and an ethical scientist, one has to not only like to be honest and tell the truth, and I'm paraphrasing here, but one has to bend over backwards. One has a responsibility to bend over backwards to really make sure they're using simple language and to make something accessible to people. And I just don't know that there's any element of education today that really provides technologists with that strong foundation in ethics and humanities. And we just don't have that diversity. And so that's the thing that I would worry about. It's not necessarily the AI and taking over the world. It's the fact that we just haven't figured out how to do this right. We haven't figured out how to incorporate um, diverse opinions and also build up these systems that we can explain and have confidence about.
Yeah,
But I do think that I have a lot of hope that technology as this guiding force has led to better health. I'm certainly happy living today and not 200 years ago. If I get sick, like the medical facilities are wonderful and they have so many more tests and vaccines. I feel I feel very privileged to live in a time where we can use cell phones to communicate that shelter in place is a thing. We have the internet. Um, I grew up talking to people who would not be the people who I would have met in my sheltered community. And so
Yeah.
I think I'm very pro on the idea of technology, and I'm very pro it being done right in a way that doesn't leave people behind.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you brought this point up earlier, but you seem to be combining the world of your fascination with technology, but also with equality and diversity and fairness and giving everyone that equal opportunity. And I think that it makes a lot of sense, the things that you've worked on and the things you care about in the light of those two contexts.
Yeah, there's one, or there's two figures that kind of stand out in my head. Sorry for the background noise. One is that according to I think it's a 2011 Pew Research study, something like 70% of the world lives on less than $10 a day, and I think it should be taken with a grain of salt that actually $10 provides for a reasonable life in a lot of areas. Like the real measure is where's the poverty line, right?
Hmm.
Um, but suffice to say, it doesn't matter where the poverty line is when we're talking about academic papers. And I think it's reasonable to say many PhD programs in the United States um, are at the level where a lot of the research they're doing comes from academic papers.
Hmm.
And if we agree upon that, and we look at something like Elsevier that charges around $2,500 each journal, then in India you're making a decision between four journals or your entire salary for the year. That is, if you want to be at the top of the curve, competing with the big players in the field, that is the type of decision that you're faced with. And so, if we figure that 71% of the world is the figure we were just talking about, and a lot of them are going to work hard and they're going to get into colleges and have access to the information. So let's drop it down to just 25%. So a third of the calculated number. If we do that, then we're talking about around 2 billion people in the world. And if that lack of access to information equates to even 1 hour lost every year, which is kind of a weird way to put it, right? So it's like if somehow their productivity is impacted by just 1 hour, uh,
Yes, I think you made this argument in the sauna. It's coming
and then
back to
yeah,
me.
all right, great. Yeah, then that's two billion hours of human productivity that's gone to waste because we as citizens haven't empowered each other correctly. And I think one of the reasons that this kind of is my goal is I have the privilege of having free time, of thinking, of nonsense philosophizing or whatever you want to say. And so I feel that it's a part of my moral obligation to find some ways to give other people the opportunity, not to force it. I don't necessarily think that people should have to have a life goal or a life mission or do some project they don't want to do, but I do think more people should have the opportunity. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, yeah, well put. I want to check in. We have like about 5 minutes in the hour. Is there anything that you wanted to still discuss that, but we haven't been able to get to, or anything else or questions for me, or anything
Well,
else you
I'd
want to
love
talk about?
to touch back to the kind of the emphasis of big thoughts, little talks, and make sure that there aren't nuggets that I can include that will really enrich your personal mission with doing these podcasts.
Sure. You're just asking like why I started the podcast in the first place.
Yeah, and if there's a way that I can connect dots and help that be successful.
Yeah. So I've been um, so around 2 or 3 years ago, I started making some videos on Facebook, and I sort of I really fell in love with this idea of being able to share uh, share things I've learned, share things I'm excited about, share just like something I read that I really liked with more people. Like I would have conversations with friends, good friends of mine, and where I'm like always talking. Every time I see a friend of mine, I'm telling them about this thing that I learned that made my life better. And the feeling of being able to share a video of that, and even if only like 10 people watch it or even 100 people watch it, and they get something out of that, and they send me a message that's like, hey, I watched that video and I checked that thing out and that made my life a little bit better, like that's was such an amazing feeling for me. So I think a podcast is sort of, or starting this was sort of an extension of that. Um, I think the other aspect is sort of is more of a selfish reason, which is that I just really enjoy meeting people and meeting interesting people and getting out of my comfort zone and trying to like learn something and get more, just hear from people I normally wouldn't talk to, sort of like serendipitous interactions. And especially during the COVID time, I definitely felt that the lack of that. And I was thinking, what are some creative ways I can still keep that in my life? And the first few episodes were with friends I knew, but I started asking, and this is maybe where I could get your assistance. I started asking guests if they could think of one person that they would want to hear a podcast interview with, or that they think would have something interesting to say. If they could like connect me with them, um, that would be a great gift. So that's how I actually ended up connecting with you, thanks to our mutual friend Razi, who's great.
If
Um,
everyone in the world
mhm,
listened to an episode of Big Thoughts, Little Talks,
mhm.
then what would you want to be different about the world after it?
Gotcha. I think I don't quite have I'm kind of, so this is actually I also keep this public journal called Big Thoughts, Little Steps, and the premise of that journal is that I tend to have a lot of big thoughts and big ideas and ambitions for where I want things like this podcast to go, or my career, but I personally have this problem sometimes of when I have something that's too big in my head, I kind of am paralyzed, and I overthink things, or I just sort of like uh, I end up not making as much progress. And so one thing that I've found helpful over and over is this idea that if you have this large task or this large dream in front of you, to just try to find the smallest thing that you can do that
Mm.
pushes you in the right direction. Like, what is the next little step that I can take to get me a little bit closer to that goal? Um,
Peter, I appreciate you.
yeah,
I'm gonna share a little story from my own experience where I had to do something similar.
yeah,
Uh,
please do.
I'm I'm really happy to learn this about you. That's really cool that you have a notebook like that. I have like a crazy person quantified self spreadsheet that maybe you've seen.
Yes,
For
actually, I think before really quick, I think that should mention that your website is incredible, and I think it might be on your T-shirt you're wearing right now.
It is, yeah. We have mek.fyi. I go by Mech. It's like here I am.
Yeah,
I usually this is my Friday shirt if I'm at an event or something. Otherwise, I get Mac or Nick, which is fine. They're all just names, but I don't know. It's kind of not. It's a brand, whatever. Um, but my story is back in around 2015. Um, this is around the period when my mentality really started shifting from like I was an entrepreneur that dropped out of a PhD program and sold a company and was like all about the Y Combinator mindset and led technology for two YC companies. Um, and I was very much about like hustle, do what you can to bring your ideas to market. And I think right around the time that Aaron Swartz passed away, um, that had a really big impact on me. That was one of the reasons that I decided to volunteer for I spun down my second company, um, kind of ran it as a more of a lifestyle to pay the bills, and volunteered all of my time at the Internet Archive and working on side projects. One of them was the quantified self document to get my life back in order. Has something like 10 columns from push-ups to pull-ups to number of minutes of exercise to the number of minutes that I'm learning, the number of minutes of Chinese in particular, how many like lectures or books that I'm watching or reading, how much sleep I'm getting, how much organization I'm getting, and there's something like 2,000 rows of this craziness over the past 5 years, and I can look back and see, oh, I'm like 200 push-ups short of 30,000 push-ups, and I have like the
wow.
creaky, weird, like broken arms to prove it. I'm not saying having a spreadsheet results in like good outcomes,
Yeah, but it's the
and
first step.
yeah, and also the kind of the advice that I would give back to some people is that I haven't kept a spreadsheet because like looking at the metrics or the results is I don't want to data mine it. Honestly, building habits is really hard. and committing to looking at something at least once a day and getting into a habit of exercising that muscle and growing those roots has easily been the most important part of that process. I look back and I notice I got lazy. I skipped inputting like an entire week. And as I go through that exercise, I start to see like I haven't played music at all this week. Music is important to me. Um, so that was kind of the quantified self element. I mean, the way that we know each other is through climbing. And the joke that I'll kind of allude to is I had a coach that I don't like the idea of paying for things that I think everyone should have access to, which is why I pretty much give away everything I can as open source. Um, Unfortunately, my climbing coach was on the other end of this one. Like I tracked down Austin Lee and I just climbed with him every day. I would follow him around and basically I would just call him coach. And he's like, all right, he's like a V12 outdoor climber. He's a beast. And eventually I broke him down and actually that's not true. He's just so nice. He was willing. He wanted a climbing partner and I was lucky to get a coach out of it and a good friend. And so we climbed together all the way from like V6 to when I hit V11. Like a lot of that was just him. Um, and we were on a climbing trip one day, and he said, "Be sure to wake up at 9 in the morning." And I was like, "Oh, I could do that, sure." Then I woke up. It's like I woke up because my phone was ringing. It was 9 in the morning. I wasn't dressed. It was Austin and his family, and I was like, "Oh shoot!" And I picked up the phone, and they're like, "Are you ready?" And I was like, I'm close to ready. And they're like, don't forget food. So I ran into the kitchen. I got these Mission tortilla wraps and a thing of Skippy peanut butter. And we went climbing, and everyone else had like steak and like wonderful gourmet things. They love to cook. And I'm like spreading, peanut butter with a plastic knife, not even reusable. Um, and ever since then, they told me I should just tag Skippy peanut butter in all of my climbing videos. And I did that for around 4 years, 3 years. And eventually Skippy was like, this is cool. We'll send you some vouchers.
Oh
And
wow.
I started making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and just giving them away to the hungry and the mission. And I got to meet all of these people. Some of them thought I was trying to poison them, honestly. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be nice. Um, and then my friends, like Jeremy Rubin, was like, have you thought about creating a peanut butter company? And I was like, no, that's a crazy idea. Like I'm like running this project on the side. I have OpenLibrary. I have a bunch of other stuff. I have a community house that requires a lot of work. I don't have time. Like that's ridiculous. And I was like, pause for a second. Just think about this. Like his advice is coming from a good place. He's a smart guy. I should at least dignify the thought. So I did some research and there were some expletive deleteds. And I was like, oh, darn, he's right. Like the margins are there. I could totally start a small peanut butter company. I did some research. I figured out that in California, there's this thing called the Cottage Act, which means you don't need like a fully blown kitchen in order to produce like nut butters or legume butters. And so it's something you could do within your kitchen.
Hmm.
And so for a while, I kept getting Skippy peanut butter. My friends would donate it to me, or Skippy would give me vouchers. Um, and I would wait until like Foods Co. had Skippy peanut butter for $3.99 because each voucher was like $4.
Yeah.
So cheap, but it was so fun. And then eventually, uh, me and a few housemates just like created this toy of a nonprofit fun side project called peanutsforgood.org. And now we have a peanut butter company. We have like 30 pounds of peanuts in the other room. And we do it like, what is it, the Tom's model, where if
Hmm.
you buy a jar of peanut butter, then another jar, we get peanut butter to like make sandwiches for the SF needy. And we've just been doing it as a side project. But that's an example of how like a blank spreadsheet kind of turned into like tracking what my goals were, finding a coach, getting up to V11 and climbing, getting a fake sponsorship from Skippy, and then
Yeah.
creating a
All
fake
that
peanut butter
climbing,
company
all that climbing really just led to this pinnacle of starting your own peanut butter company. I think that's
of success
the
in my
lesson.
life.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think yeah, I think we'll probably have to wrap up soon. I feel like we can talk for I could probably ask you many questions and we could talk for hours, but um, yeah, I think it's really cool your quantified self spreadsheet. I was actually looking at it when I was looking through your website, and I felt very intimate. Maybe the intimate is not the right word, but I was the only viewer. Like you were also on that sheet, and I could actually see like the cell that you were on, and I was like, oh man, this is quite an experience. But yeah, I think that doing I feel very similarly about the public journal that I started, and it's almost more about like it's not really about the quality of the content right now. It's not really about what I write about, but like finding something that you can go to every single day and you can open up every single day, and just building that habit, I think just has compounding effects that will.
And I agree. The archivist in me is it's kind of it maybe it's pretentious or narcissistic, but the archive in me thinks that one of the things that I worry about is if I were to die tomorrow, um, A, is would I have any loose ends in relationships that I would feel bad about? And so that impacts how I treat people. I try to treat people with respect and kindness. But also, from the selfish point of view, I have a lot of projects that aren't documented, that, just ideas that are half baked. And the thing that I worry about is just all of us are duplicating each other's efforts. We're not talking enough, even if it's not perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Um, this isn't the case for everything. When you're designing a NASA, rocket, you probably want to be perfect. But for a lot of elements in life, there are probably other people who have very similar goals to us. And I've been lucky to find a few and to work with a few. But really the outcome I would want is I want the output of my life to be resources, documentation, and nourishment that people can continue as if it were their own without any expectation or projection. If that's life lessons that I get, I want to share them. I just want to be a good citizen. And I think if we had more people that were willing to share and be good citizens, then even from a selfish perspective, I think a lot of our lives would be a lot more enriched and better off. I hope we get there.
Yeah, and kind of tying back to your last question to me, I hope that listeners hearing to this, maybe there's a few that are inspired by your attitude and can sort of take that up and become citizens of the world themselves. So thank you so much, Mech. Is there any way that, or what's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing or uh,
It's so invited. You can find me at hi, like hello, at mek.fyi, or you can go to my website at mek.fyi. If you have a business related email, feel free to send it to mek at archive.org. And if you happen to want to help out with any of the projects that I mentioned, both openlibrary.org, our book Genome project are both open source. You can go to our GitHub and just get involved. And if you want to be a lead on any of these projects, I'll try my best to help you be successful. And if you have some spare cash and want to put it to a good cause, I would say peanutsforgood.org would be just a fun thing. And then also the book sponsorship program on openlibrary.org/sponsorship. And if you have an idea and I can be helpful, just as a second pair of eyes, let me know, because we also run a philanthropic incubator program called Archive Labs. It's not exactly related to the Internet Archive, but it's a place where people who believe in public good and open access can come together, jump into a whole network of around 200 people, just ask each other questions, share resources, and help each other be successful. And if I can help in any of these ways, I'd be so delighted. Peter, thank you so much,
awesome.
and for all of your listeners for giving me a chance to speak in the microphone.
No, thank you. That was definitely my pleasure. And I hope to have another conversation with you soon, whether it's recorded or not. Maybe we'll see, and we'll have a hopefully meet in person once this whole thing is over. So
I,
thank
I
you,
look
man.
forward to the chance to climb in person once shelter in place is done. And I do want to, on a final note, say that I know this is a really difficult time for a lot of people, both in terms of COVID and being separated from friends and loved ones. And if Peter and I were able to even offer a few minutes of reprieve of heavy thought, then that's great. And I hope you are able to make it through it successfully, and there's brightness on the other side.
Well put. All right, thanks again, Mech. It's great talking to you.
Cheers.